All right, so today we're diving into some really cool research on something we all experience. Human confidence. You know that feeling when you're just so sure you're right.
Yeah, it's fascinating, right? Like even when something's tricky, we can still feel totally certain.
Exactly, and that's what we're going to explore, those feelings of certainty, especially when we're making those quick decisions based on what we see.
It is wild how we can be so confident, even when what we're looking at is kind of tough to figure out. This deep dive is going to help us understand, like, how does the brain even create those feelings?
Love it. And the deep dive today is based on some seriously groundbreaking work from researchers at Georgia Tech's School of Psychology.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so we've got Medha, Shekhar, and Dobromir, Rahnev. They're all tackling this big question of how we form those judgments where we're like, I'm positive.
I'm positive I've heard of at least one of them, yeah.
Right.
And their findings are like really shaking things up in this whole area of research.
Oh, for sure. So for a long time, the main theory about confidence has been this thing called the Bayesian confidence hypothesis. BCH for short.
Right, BCH, I've heard of that. Okay, so remind me, what's the main idea there again?
Basically, it's like saying our brains act like these probability machines, always calculating how likely am I to be correct based on the evidence, you know?
So it's like there's this super complex calculator running in the background of our brains, weighing all these different possibilities and spitting out a confidence score.
Yeah, pretty much. But the research we're looking at today is suggesting it might not be quite that complicated.
Really? So what are they saying instead?
Well, the researchers are proposing a different theory. It's called confidence in raw evidence space, or CRES.
CRES, okay, that's a new one. How is that different from the whole Bayesian thing?
So think of it like this. You're trying to hear someone whispering in a really noisy room.
Oh man, I hate when that happens. Super frustrating.
Right. It's tough. Now, according to BCH, your confidence in what you hear depends on how sure you are that you actually understood what they said. You know, with all that noise and your knowledge of language and stuff.
So like your brain's got to filter out the noise, try to make sense of what you're hearing, and then your confidence is based on how well you think you did with that whole process.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But CRES, it takes a different approach. It says your confidence is determined by how loud the whisper itself is, like how strong that initial signal is, regardless of the background noise.
So it's less about consciously calculating and more about how clear that initial whisper is. Interesting. But how did they actually test these ideas? Seems tricky.
Clever experiments, for sure. So they had participants doing these simple visual tasks.
Oh, okay. Like what kind of tasks?
So people would look at a pattern on a screen, and then they had to judge something about it. Like, is this line tilted slightly to the left or right?
Gotcha. Simple enough. But there's got to be a twist, right?
You bet. The researchers would change how hard it was to see the pattern. That's the key, because now they can see how people's confidence changes when the task gets tougher. And that's where the two theories have different predictions.
Oh, I see where this is going. So if someone's brain's using that Bayesian approach, their confidence should plummet when it gets harder because, well, they're more likely to make a mistake.
Exactly. But with CRES, confidence should stick closer to the strength of the visual signal. Even if they know it's hard, they're still basing confidence on that initial input.
Fascinating. So what happened? Who was right?
Well, the results kind of threw a wrench in the Bayesian model, actually. They found that even when people knew a task was harder and knew they were more likely to be wrong, their confidence didn't drop as much as BCH predicted.
Wow. So it sounds like our confidence might be more driven by the strength of those signals in our brains, like CRES suggests, rather than all those complex probability calculations.
Yeah, it's looking that way.
Right.
And just to be extra certain, they went above and beyond to explore other explanations.
Oh, right, of course. Got to rule out other factors.
They wanted to make sure it wasn't like lapses in attention or people just approaching the task differently.
Super important to control for that stuff. So what did they find?
Even after considering all those nuances, the evidence still kept pointing to CRES. Seems like that simpler, more direct explanation might be the real deal when it comes to those gut feelings of confidence.
I love it when a simpler explanation wins out. So if our confidence isn't always like a perfect reflection of how likely we are to be right, what does that even mean for us in the real world? Does that mean we can't trust our gut?
That's the million-dollar question, and one we'll definitely dig into deeper. But first, I think it's worth taking a closer look at this whole CRES hypothesis, because it's a real game changer in how we think about confidence.
Definitely. Let's unpack CRES a bit more. What are the key takeaways there?
So we've been exploring this idea that our confidence it might be based more on the strength of that initial signal, the one our brains get, rather than some super complicated probability calculation.
Right, right. Like how loud or clear that signal is right off the bat.
Exactly. But what does that actually mean for us, out in the real world? How does this understanding of confidence, change how we should approach making decisions in our lives?
That's a great question to ask, and that's where things get really interesting. If our confidence isn't always a super reliable sign of accuracy, then we've got to be more aware of those situations where our gut feelings might be leading us astray.
Yeah, it's not about becoming less confident, right? It's
Yeah.
more about, being smarter about when to really trust your gut and when to maybe pump the brakes a little bit, maybe
Yeah.
gather some more information before jumping in.
Exactly. And one area where this is super important is in eyewitness testimony.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
We often put so much weight on how confident an eyewitness seems, but this research, well, it suggests that just because someone feels super certain doesn't mean their memory is accurate.
That's a really good point. I've read about cases where eyewitnesses were totally convinced they'd picked the right person out of a lineup, but then DNA evidence later proved them wrong.
Exactly.
It's kind of scary, actually. Makes you realize how important it is to look at more than just how confident someone seems.
It really does. Eyewitness testimony is a whole complex issue. But understanding that just because someone's confident doesn't mean they're right, well, it can help us be more cautious in those situations. We got to look for more evidence, not just rely on someone's gut feeling.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So shifting gears a bit, what about in our personal lives? How can we use this understanding of confidence to make better decisions day to day?
Well, think about the last time you made a big decision. Could have been anything, really. Accepting a job offer, maybe buying a house, or even just what to have for dinner. How much did your confidence in that decision affect your choice?
That's a good question. I know I tend to go with my gut a lot, especially when I feel pressed for time or when there are just too many options. But now I'm wondering if I should be slowing down more often, being more critical of those gut feelings, especially for the big stuff.
I think that's wise. We hear all the time, trust your gut, and there is definitely value in intuition, for sure. But it's important to remember that our gut feelings can be influenced by things we're not even aware of.
Yeah, the strength of that initial signal.
Yeah.
Right, even if it's not accurate, it can still make us feel super confident.
Exactly. So instead of just blindly trusting our gut, we can try to be more mindful, be more aware of that potential for bias, and look for extra evidence when we need to.
So it's like adding a step in our decision-making process, a check step. Before we jump all in, we ask, okay, I feel confident, but is that feeling based on something real, or is it just a strong reaction?
I like that, a check step. And that check step could be anything, really. Getting different perspectives, doing a bit more research, or just taking a breather and really thinking through the pros and cons.
Yeah, like a safety net to catch us if our confidence is leading us in the wrong direction.
Exactly. And remember, this isn't about being indecisive or second-guessing every little thing. It's about having a healthy amount of doubt, especially when the stakes are high.
Makes sense. I think a good example of this is with money stuff. It's easy to get caught up in the excitement of a potential investment or maybe the fear of missing out on something. But those emotions, they can really cloud our judgment and make us do something impulsive.
Absolutely. In those situations, it's crucial to step back. Do your research, talk to experts if you need to. Don't let a burst of confidence, whether it's from excitement or fear, control your decisions about money.
Like a financial cooling off period. Give yourself time to think things through before you commit.
Precisely. And you can use that same idea in so many areas of life, whether it's relationships, careers, or even just what to order for lunch. Taking a moment to pause and think can help you make a better choice.
It's all about that balance, right?
Right.
Trusting your intuition, but also knowing its limits.
Exactly. And the more we understand about how these feelings of confidence get created in our brains, the better we can navigate the world. We can be confident, but also wise.
I love that. Okay, so we've talked about how to approach decisions with more awareness. But what about those times when we're already feeling super confident, even though we probably shouldn't be? How can we, catch ourselves in those moments and maybe adjust our confidence level a bit?
That's a fantastic question, and it gets at what we might call confidence literacy. It's about being able to sense those subtle things that can affect how certain we feel.
Ooh, confidence literacy. I like that.
Yeah.
So it's like developing a sixth sense for when our confidence might be a little off?
Yeah, precisely. And while there's no magic formula, there are things we can do to become more aware. One thing is to pay attention to how quickly we make judgments. Remember, this research suggests that faster decisions often go hand in hand with higher confidence, even if we're not necessarily right.
So if we're like jumping to conclusions or feeling certain really fast, that could be a sign to slow down. Take a closer look.
Exactly. It's like recognizing that our brains have this fast track for confidence, and sometimes we need to switch gears and be more deliberate.
Instead of always going with that initial gut reaction, we take a second to ask, okay, why am I so sure about this? What's the evidence?
Exactly. And that questioning, it can help us spot those biases or blind spots that might be messing with our judgment.
Like we're shining a light on our own thoughts and being more critical of what we're assuming.
I like that analogy. And another good strategy is to get different perspectives. If everyone around you is agreeing and boosting your confidence, it can create an echo chamber, which just makes your biases worse.
Right, like that saying, if everyone's thinking alike, then someone isn't thinking.
Exactly. So it's important to actively look for opinions that challenge your own, even if they make you a little uncomfortable. Those different voices can help you see the bigger picture and maybe spot flaws in your thinking.
It's like having a devil's advocate on your shoulder, pushing you to consider other explanations and question your assumptions.
Precisely. And this doesn't mean you have to abandon your beliefs or doubt yourself all the time. It's about having some intellectual humility, recognizing that you don't always have all the answers.
You know, this makes me think about confidence in learning and personal growth. If we're too confident in what we already know, we might miss out on new information or different ways of thinking.
Absolutely. There's a delicate balance between confidence and curiosity. We need some confidence to go after our goals and take risks, but we also need to be open to being wrong and learning from our mistakes.
Right, like that growth mindset idea, embracing challenges and seeing failures as learning opportunities.
Exactly, and this research actually supports that. It reminds us that confidence isn't fixed, it's a process. And it can be shaped by what we experience and how willing we are to question what we think we know.
So maybe the goal shouldn't be to be always confident, but to be more confidence aware, to understand what affects our feelings of certainty and use that knowledge to make smarter choices.
I love that. Confidence awareness. It's an essential skill, especially in today's world. It lets us be assertive and open-minded at the same time. We can go after our goals with conviction, but still be open to new information and different ways of thinking.
This has been amazing. We've covered so much from those initial I'm absolutely sure feelings to the neural pathways of confidence. We've even challenged those old theories and uncovered some surprising stuff about how our brains work.
I know, right? And the thing is, we're just scratching the surface when it comes to understanding the human mind. Every new discovery leads to more questions and more things to explore.
So as we go about our day, let's all try to be more mindful of those moments when we feel super confident. Ask yourself, what's behind this feeling? Is it solid evidence, careful thought, and different perspectives? Or is it just a quick gut reaction?
Such a good point. By paying attention to those subtle signs and asking those critical questions, we can become better judges of our own certainty. And that leads to better decisions in every part of our lives.
This has been such an insightful deep dive. Thank you so much for joining me in this exploration of confidence. We'll see you next time for another exciting look into the human mind. You mentioned raw evidence base earlier. What is that exactly, and how does it fit into all of this?
It's a super interesting part of this research, for sure. Remember how we were talking about CRES? How it suggests our confidence is based on how strong those first signals are when they hit our brains?
Yeah. Like how clear or how loud that signal is before our brain really starts processing it all.
Exactly. Well, that raw evidence space, that's essentially where those signals first show up. It's the area in our brains where we process all those sights and sounds and other sensory information before it gets turned into thoughts and ideas.
Oh, okay. So it's like the entry point for all that raw data coming in from our senses.
Exactly. And what the researchers are saying is those confidence judgments, they might start in this raw evidence space, not in those higher level parts of the brain that deal with probabilities and decision making.
Huh. That's pretty wild. So our initial feeling of confidence, it's more like a bottom-up thing, driven by how strong those early signals are, rather than a top-down process of like thinking and reasoning.
Exactly. It's like our brains are saying, hey, this signal is strong and clear, let's go with it, even if we don't know exactly why.
I get it.
Right.
It reminds me of those times when you think you recognize someone on the street, but then it turns out to be a total stranger.
Yeah.
Your brain got a strong visual signal, but it was a false alarm.
Perfect example. It shows how our brains are always trying to figure things out quickly, but sometimes those shortcuts can lead us to make the wrong judgments.
Like our brains are built for speed, not perfect accuracy, especially when we need to make fast decisions every day.
That's a great way to think about it. And this research really highlights why it's important to understand these mechanisms so we can be aware of the potential downsides of just trusting our gut.
Wow. This has been such an eye-opening deep dive. We've covered so much, from those I'm totally sure feelings to the actual pathways in the brain that create our confidence. We've even questioned those old theories and discovered some amazing things about how our brains work.
It's been quite a journey. And the thing is, we're really just starting to understand how complex human cognition is. Each new thing we learn leads to even more questions and areas to explore.
So as we go about our day, let's all try to be more aware of when we feel that super confident feeling. Ask yourself, what's making me feel this way? Is it based on real evidence and careful thought? Have I considered different perspectives? Or is it just a quick gut reaction?
That's fantastic advice. When we tune into those little clues and ask those critical questions, we become much better at judging our own certainty. And that helps us make better decisions in all parts of our lives.
This has been a truly fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the world of confidence. We'll see you next time for another exploration of the amazing human mind.